Welcome to this episode of the Agile for Agilists podcast. I'm your host, Brad Nelson, and with me as always is my partner in crime, Drew Podwell.
Hello, everybody. How you doing?
And today we have a super exciting episode. We're going to talk about FAST and what it is, what the acronym stands for, all of that. Today I'm joined by my colleague, Todd Hallowell. And do you consider yourself like the author, creator, founder of FAST, Ron Quartel?
Yes, founder, I think, is the nearest thing I've been using, which doesn't feel quite right, but until I can think of something better, sure.
Well, welcome. We're excited. We're excited to learn all about this. I mean, I've read it. I've heard about it as well from Todd, who's a colleague of mine at Insight for about 4 years now. He predates me and has been a joy to work with. So, Todd, why don't we start with having you introduce what it is you do?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So, Todd Hallowell, thanks for having us on, Brad and Drew. Appreciate that. So, I work with Brad. Best description is an Agilist or Agile coach with Insight, working with various different levels of individuals, teams, and organizations, kind of trying to help them find better ways of getting back to principle-driven collaboration and kind of just finding the most effective, efficient ways to get to value for their users, despite any specific type or specific set of tools. So,
not going with Agile Chameleon today?
No, it's usually Purple Fluffy Bunny is what I go with. So people have to go, what does that mean? And that's really, to me, the better question. So he says, what do you do at Insight? Well, what's your role is usually the question I get, right? And it's Purple Fluffy Bunny. And then they have to ask what that means. Too many assumptions. If you give somebody a role that they know what it means, they kind of jump to those right away and you lose some value.
One of the things that I appreciate about Todd is he definitely finds creative ways of engaging people that I don't see anyone else do. So for any of our listeners in Columbus, if you went to Path to Agility, you saw a sea of pink shirts for Insight. That was the ingenuity of Todd. Very, very creative, fun Agilist I get to work with. So Ron, I assume you've done more with your life than found FAST. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi. I really like Todd's answer of the pink fluffy rabbit, whatever it is. I can really relate to that because I have troubles describing what I do as well. So my career started as a developer, and from there it's kind of weaved through dev manager, agile coach, technical sales, and yeah, just keep weaving through those, but always in the field of Agile in one way or another. Actually, right now, I'm doing dev work. I guess my real passion is for org design, and I do that when I can, but when I can't, I'll do other things.
And you live in Detroit now, correct?
I do, as of last week. Yeah.
Yeah, so I am also from Michigan originally, not Detroit. So Ron gets points there from me. But where are you from originally?
I'm from Sydney, Australia. You can probably hear a bit of the accent coming through.
Yes, it's lovely. So, Ron, why don't you tell the audience, what does FAST stand for and where did it come from?
Yeah, FAST is an acronym for Fluid Scaling Technology. The A is silent, and a bit of a joke, because turns out Agile scaling methods need to have a fourth lowercase letter somewhere. So I squeeze one in. But it is essentially fluid scaling technology. I don't make it lowercase. I've just called it FAST. And FAST can be used in different contexts. And when used for Agile software development, I call it FAST Agile. So it's most commonly known as FAST Agile, or just FAST for short.
And what inspired you?
Yeah, I was at a conference in 2014 in New Orleans. It was this Scrum gathering. And the third day of that conference was an open space event. At that point, I was an Agile coach. And the theme around that time, around 2014, there was a lot of talk around Agile scaling. So I was an Agile coach, lots of talk about Agile scaling. The coaching I was doing is at the team level. I was very comfortable and confident at that. And I was looking at everything around in the scaling stuff going on, and it just wasn't sitting right. And I'm thinking, I'm going to leave this to smarter people than me. And when the dust settles, I'm going to swing around and have another look at it. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep it at arm's length. That was my attitude to scaling at that point in time. So day 3 comes along, and it's an open space event, and we've just, I'm hoping you're familiar with open space. It really helps to understand open space to get a grasp of how FAST works. So we've just finished populating the marketplace, and I'm looking at the marketplace, and I'm looking at the crowd, and there's a good 800 people, I think that was a number at that conference. And I thought, isn't this just amazingly beautiful? In 20 minutes, 800 people have self-organized a one-day event. I mean, this just feels so agile, just in how beautiful it forms. And I thought, and there's 800 people. This scales. This is agile at scale. Why aren't we using open space as a way to scale agile? And that was when I put my finger on what I didn't like about what I was seeing, was that it didn't feel agile to me. Like, it felt like we were doing reductionism, determinism, sort of more waterfall feel to scaling, approach to scaling, than agile approach to scaling. So I thought, open space feels like it could be a good option. So it was just a crazy idea, but that was the birth of the idea.
Awesome. And can you give us, our listeners, maybe just a short description of open space if they aren't aware of it, or where they might go to learn more?
Yeah. So open space, most commonly known as, you might hear it called unconference. It's becoming more and more popular now. And so if you go to an Agile conference, quite often there'll be an open space session or an open space day. So what happens at an open space conference? It was discovered, invented by Harrison Owen, and he was someone that was putting together conferences, traditional conferences, year on year. And he was so frustrated that at the end of the conference, in the feedback, the most popular part of the conference had nothing to do with all of the stuff that he'd organized. It was always the water cooler conversations. And he thought, you know what? Next year, I'm going to have the whole conference be just a giant water cooler conversation. And that was the birth of open space. And so he invites everyone to a conference. They show up and he goes, all right, now you're going to determine what we're going to talk about. So people sit in a circle and they all come up with something. Not they all come up with something. Todd's in the circle, and Todd's interested in learning about something. And so he'll get up and say, I want to learn more about Agile in aeronautics. And I'm going to be over in room 1 at 2 p.m. And Brad gets up and says, well, I want to share something really exciting about what I've learned about Gherkin languages and how they test code. I'm going to be in room number 2. And so there's various reasons that people get up and say, I want to be responsible for an event. So we put all of those into a marketplace. And in the beginning, I explained how the marketplace factor to open space. So now we have a market space of events. People look at those events and then they decide which they go to. And they have the freedom to stay in that event or move out. It used to be called the law of 2 feet. It's now called the law of mobility, which is cognizant of the fact that not everyone has 2 feet. So, the law of mobility applies, and you follow your gut instincts. And I've never seen it fail. It's always, one thing we say in open space is be prepared to be surprised. And every time I'm surprised, I've always got value from an open space conference. And I hope that kind of explains it.
I love open space events. I find them to be so immersive. There's always so much to learn. I come away with them or from them totally like reinvented as an Agilist, as a person, feeling really fulfilled with lots of new ideas and understandings. And as a result, I'm always more energized at the end of them to then move into the activities that for the rest of the week. Now, I'm sitting here and I hope I'm not getting ahead. I'm thinking about the idea of and I am another 4-letter acronym with the lowercase a in the middle of it guy, but I'm open-minded, right? I'm not a methodologist. And I'm thinking that in FAST, do you run an open space type event in lieu of what SAFe would call a PI planning? Is that, or am I reading in between the lines too much?
I guess there are some parallels to that. But now what if we're running that every 2 days versus PI planning, which you do once a quarter?
Every 2 days?
Every 2 days or shorter. So the outline is to find the shortest possible scale that can work for you. And the shortest I've been able to do was 2 days that we got to play with.
That's really cool. And so how long are these open spaces that you run?
It's a great question. And so the largest, we used to call it a tribe, but now we call it a collective. So you can imagine if you get all of the teams that you have that are related in some way, and we're going to push them all together and we'll say, you are now one collective. I used to call it a tribe. You might hear me slip in between those words. So now the entire tribe meets for this meeting, which is kind of based on open space. The entire meeting, we found in the largest tribe I got to play with was about 60 people. It took 15 minutes. And it surprised me because it took 15 minutes when we were small, like we started with about 16 people. We scaled up to 60 and it still takes 15 minutes. And that's similar to other people I've heard. They'll describe 15 to 30 minutes. And there's one meeting in FAST. It's called the FAST meeting. And that's it. It's this kind of open space-like event.
So when I've done open spaces before, maybe I'm misunderstanding it, is we've, set up the marketplace at the beginning or either asynchronously before the event. And then usually it's like 4 hours with 4 time slots. And that, you grab your item from the marketplace and you put them in the different time slots. So are you saying that the entire open space takes 15 minutes to run?
So FAST is built on the concept of open space. And you've got to kind of think not open space now. So so we've built a tribe. We get all the work that the tribe has to do and we throw it on the wall. So now we can visualize, hey, this is what this tribe is trying to do right now. So that isn't the marketplace. That is the bulletin board. Like that's something else. So we're now looking at that, and in each FAST meeting, we're going to build a marketplace for that next I don't want to use the word iteration. We thought it was in the beginning. It's now called a value cycle. But for that value cycle that's coming up, that next 2 days, we say, hey, there's 60 of us. There's a whole bunch of stuff over there. What are we going to do for the next 2 days? And really, if you get up to facilitate or essentially to be a team lead, we call it a story steward. If you want to steward a team for those 2 days, I'm going to use 2 days as the example. And then we're using the collective wisdom of the tribe to determine what's the most sensible thing that we can do in the next 2 days. So Drew says, I'm going to be working on feature A in room number 1. Brad says, well, I finished feature B. My team finished feature B that I was part of. But we left a whole bunch of tech debt behind. So I'm going to be doing some refactoring and cleaning up over in room 2. And Todd gets up and says, I've noticed there's a common architecture that's falling out here. And I think there's a real component layer that would help us. So I'm going to be over in room number 3. So I've just given 3 examples there, of which Drew was the only person that drew something off the wall. Brad and Todd both said they're going to be doing something else. So Todd's forming a component team, Drew's working on a feature team, and Brad's doing some refactoring. And there's one role called the product manager who's kind of cares about the big picture. Product manager says, well, if that's the collective wisdom of the tribe, then that's what we're going to be doing this value cycle. Go. And that's what we're relying on people caring about the big picture and doing the right thing and self-determining what should happen in what order.
I also noticed I'm looking at the guide, the overview. I love the principles, and I love specifically the first principle of do the right thing. I could see how these principles are necessary culturally to support having that mindset where people can pick items off the board, right, or off the marketplace, or have the autonomy to not choose one and fill in the blanks and the gaps a little bit. Do you have to pay any royalties to Spike Lee for Do the Right Thing, or?
That took me a sec. I should ask.
Sorry.
I'm changing directions now. So Drew is a big culture person. Like time and time again, he talks about culture. And I'm curious, this autonomy essentially is what you're describing, Ron. Does that take a certain level of maturity in your team, in your organization, or your tribe?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'll answer that in two ways. One is every adult outside of work knows how to act autonomously. So I know that every adult has the capability of being self-directed and self-managing. And I'm using the word self-managing here because we've kind of pushed autonomy like as far as we can. So, the Agile Manifesto uses the word self-organizing. The Scrum Guide just switched to the word self-managing. And FAST pushes that boundary, right down further towards self-management. So in reality, and I've had to talk with a few people on this one, because there's two schools of thought. Some people think, everyone is capable of it, and some people don't. And I'm in the don't school out of my experiences. I don't think everyone is ready yet for having that level of self-organization and self-management, which makes me really sad and has really sparked my personal mission. I'm going down a branch here of untethering the human spirit in the workplace. Because, what have we done as a society or our schools, or is it our churches, or is it the way we govern, that people show up to work and not everyone, has that ability to self-organize. Some people still just want to be told what to do so they can do a good job, get a pat on the back and go home. And there's safety in that for sure. And I can understand that. And I don't want to take people out. I don't want to force people out of their comfort zone. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'd say, when you build a FAST tribe, if you're thinking about doing this experiment, find people that want to do it and don't force anyone into it. Or if you decide that this is something that is working for most people, then find a way to help those people that it isn't working for and find them something else, because it's a different way of working.
It feels like it requires like a high level of talent density, or where everybody is. We have more people who are curious and innovative and problem solvers and want that ability to be handed a complex problem to solve, as opposed to a ready-made, here's, a bunch of bricks and some mortar and a trowel, build me this wall.
Right.
Well, and Drew, you mentioned, and Ron, you said it a little bit too. I think the thing too to talk about in this is it really comes down to courage. Right? You've got to be willing to step out and, you talk about comfort zones and getting out of it. It really is about courage. And I think the other thing too that Ron didn't touch on in this conversation, but he and I have talked about a few times, you don't have to have 60 people, right? It's find that small amount of people that have that level of courage, that have that level of enthusiasm to do something different, to learn, to break the mold, your dissenters, right? Your first movers, and start a movement. And then what happens is that as people see that the potential value they gain from trying something differently or adding a new tool to their tool belt exceeds the risk that they perceived present, that courage becomes easier to find, right? You're going to have to find some people who are willing to fail, and that's when that risk or the potential for risk outweighs any value you might see. And those are going to be the people that really kind of you want to start with, right? And then as those people start to prove out the concept, that balance of risk versus reward kind of changes a little bit, and you start to get some people who are ready as your early adopters, but maybe they were your first movers. And then as that risk reward continues to change balance and reward becomes evident and risk becomes less, you start to see that enthusiasm and that movement grow. I mean, it's a classic case of how to build a movement. You can't necessarily go in and expect to start with a large crowd of people. It takes a few people who are willing to do that. I think one of the sayings I've seen is that well-behaved women never made history, but it's the idea of well-behaved people never made history, right? So go out there and take some risks and prove that out, and then you start to get more people involved. And it's not always going to be a collective of 60 people. We haven't gotten to it yet, and we can if we want to, but like how I got involved in this with a small team, and very similar in the principles to how FAST operates and what FAST is trying to get to is what this team did. And it's generating a movement where I'm at, both at Insight and the client that I'm serving at. So I think courage is a key thing to hit on too here, not just autonomy or agency or even skill set, but courage is a huge piece of that as well.
I love that.
Yeah.
And that was going to actually be my question, but then Drew piqued my interest on the culture. So Todd, where do you come into the picture with FAST? What is your background with it and your relationship to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So about 10 months ago, I got pulled into the client where I'm at right now. And I don't know, I think the statistic is about 80% of teams doing Agile use the one big 5-letter framework, right, that we all know. That most organizations are using Scrum. And that was what the intention was at the client where I was at. And we very quickly realized, my question to them was, why do you want to do Scrum? And they weren't quite sure. And as we started to kind of dive into what they had, we realized that it wasn't going to work. Like, there just wasn't even enough. It was too much chaos. They didn't even know what they didn't know. The question became for them, the contract that was sold, working for a consulting company, they sell certain things and frameworks. And it was, hey, let's do a 2-week sprint. And okay, well, what's the goal for the next 2 weeks? Well, they were working in such a way that they didn't even know. And the conversation, okay, well, what about for this week? And the answer was, we don't know. Okay, let's take a step back here, guys. And the question became, what do you want us to do today? Because we can't just sit around here, right? We're here, we're live, we're active. We need to be making progress. So we need to be helping you out. We can't the client's not going to let you just bill for sitting around. So we'll work on this today. All right, cool. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And this just kind of organically became this 24-hour, and we call them, I know Ron in FAST, we call them the value cycle, but for us, it became these 24-hour learning cycles. And the team would discuss, what's the most important thing to do? All right, we have this thing. This is the priority. Okay, what are the pieces of work we need to do to get that done? And the team would step up and say, well, I'll take this, and I'll take that, and I'll take this. Cool. We'll reconnect tomorrow and see where we're at. Make sure this is still the direction we're heading, and make sure we're all aligned. And this has been going on this way, and the clients absolutely loved it. So we've worked in these 24-hour learning cycles. Well, throughout the course of this client work, Ken Rickard, who we've discussed previously, he said, hey, you need to look into this FAST thing because you're doing like 75% of what they have in a principle base. He says, and your principles really align. And Drew, I want to go back to what you talked about. My favorite principle about this whole thing is do the right thing for the right reasons. Like, everything gets measured against that, right? This is a framework. If it doesn't work and it's not the right thing for the right reasons, guess what? Chuck it. Do the right thing for the right reasons. That's the purpose. And that's kind of what drove us in this engagement. So I started looking into this and I was like, yeah, I don't know if it's a match. It still feels too frameworky to me. And you can ask Brad, my favorite book is about dissent and rebels and rebellion. So for me, I'm very much like, how can I take these frameworks, break them into pieces and use the pieces I want? So when Ken said, hey, go look at this framework, I thought, yeah, I don't know. But I looked and I was like, all right, this makes sense. So I reached out to Ron and we just kind of started talking about this. And I think we connected on a meetup and I got to listen to him there. And then we talked right afterwards and just kind of shared. And I asked him a bunch of really tough questions and was impressed with his answers. And we've just kind of continued to connect through them. But it all comes back to that principle. And I think that's what I love so much about this. It's do the right thing for the right reasons. If it doesn't make sense, then don't do it. If you can do it a different way and get the same value, then do that, because if that's the right thing for the right reason. So that's kind of what's drawn me into all of this, is that principle-driven collaboration, principle-driven delivery, principle-driven development. What are we trying to get to? And do it because it's going to get us to where we're trying to get to, not because it's an arbitrary practice that somebody has said we should do.
I think it was a couple of months back when I first became aware of FAST. Actually, probably about 4 or 5 months back. And when I started looking into it, I started thinking about like the other models in comparison and whatnot. And I had this thought, right? Like, the thing for me is that, being somebody who is a bit of a safe guy, the thing that I like about SAFE is that it creates a model that is familiar to executives. And like, my biggest challenge that I've had within my career is convincing executives that they are an inherent part of this whole thing working well. And I started thinking about it that, like, you could theoretically have SAFE. I also think this is an overcompensation to an even bigger problem, which is we have too many hierarchies. But within this traditional org structure that we have at most of the enterprise companies, where there's EVPs and SVPs and VPs and directors and managers and programs and portfolios and whatnot, that you could theoretically implement SAFE from like the neck up and then replace and embed like FAST at the neck down. Is that something that you guys have thought about at all? And then also for you, Todd, like, where do executives meet the rubber where FAST is embedded where you are as well?
I guess for me, so where I'm working, the client I'm working at, they're a safe shop as well. And we've met some of this with resistance. And I think that we'll encounter this continually because people tend to think that it's a one or the other. And to me, it's not. Like, if your car needs repaired, I'm not taking it to the mechanic who's got a standard set of tools. I want to make sure he's got all the tools, right? Because some of the bolts may be standard, some of them may be metric. To me, it's about equipping yourself with the right tools. I mean, and I'm not a safe. I don't have a lot of experience with safe, Drew, but the understanding to me, and it's as it should be with every framework, is use what you need and don't use the rest. So like if you've got organizational constraints where you have to account for certain things or you need to address certain planning, or even the release planning is just it's a way, or the intended outcome is to bring the necessary teams together to talk about how all their stuff integrates. Great, do that. And then if your work is so complex or you've got so many integrations that you need to meet more frequently, or parts of that release train need to meet more frequently, and maybe you benefit from a 24-hour or a 48 or a 72 value cycle in FAST, then do that too. Like, nothing that says that these things are oil and water and can't go together. Again, it comes back to doing the right things for the right reasons. I think that, if we stop inspecting the practices and doing them, but the outcomes we're trying to get to and whether or not those work, that's the litmus that we should be looking at. I mean, we should, and it's not safe. It's not just FAST. It's any framework. If you cannot look at a practice and understand why you're doing it and ask yourself honestly, is it getting us to where we want to be in the best way? Then you're probably not really getting the most out of your processes. I mean, I've seen teams like the team I'm working with now that literally, it's funny, they've scrapped the event, and one of the teams I coach is scrapped the event retrospective. But guess what? They're still doing retro, but they don't have an event for it because they're talking about this stuff every day. This is an example I've talked about with Ron recently. This is one of those instances where I think you need to inspect, are you focused on achieving an outcome or on doing a practice? Right. And that's what these frameworks are really all built around. It's like if they should be driving us to outcomes. Yeah, I guess that's what I would say. So for us, it's just about asking those questions. Well, what is it you're trying to get from SAFE? What is it you're trying to get from FAST? Are they giving you what you want? If they are, great. If there's another way to do it, then do that. If they're not, then let's figure something else out. Does that answer the question, Drew?
No, definitely. I'm thinking about it from a standpoint of, I've been thinking about overreactions a lot lately. Brad and I are going to have a conversation Thursday around and what I think is an overreaction. But like SAFE is an overreaction, right? SAFE is an overreaction to the problem of large organizations that think they know that their business is going to always be run the same way, that the org structures that we inherited from 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago still make sense today. And we create these structures within SAFE, and even like retrospective, right? Retrospective is an overreaction. We are carving out time to force people to retrospect because we know that if we don't carve out the time for them to do that, they probably won't do it. Whereas what you're describing is more of a symbiotic state where it's a framework that assumes that everybody is there at work to do a great job and everybody is very positively charged and energetic. And I love that. I would love to work in an environment like that. I would love to roll around and bathe in it and, splish splash around. I just haven't seen those cultures in the companies that I've worked for and worked with as a coach that are ready to dive in there. And so when you said courage before, it got me really excited. But I also think that it doesn't just require courage of all the people at the waist level down. It requires courage in the leadership to say, hey, these guys or women, men, whoever, they're onto something interesting here. And I'm going to protect them to try this experiment for a period of time. And I'm going to put my neck on the line a little bit for that,
Let me address 3 different points that I heard there that I want to talk about. So the first thing is I don't know that SAFE is an overreaction any more that Scrum or FAST is. I think that the belief that a framework, when you put it in, should always be there and as a permanent installation is an overreaction. SAFE very well may be the right solution or tool for a given problem at that moment. I think the challenge we see organizations is they say, okay, we're a safe shop, so now we're a safe shop from here on out. And they don't stop to think, okay, this solved the problem we had at a given point, but we don't need this level of orchestration or guidance or structure anymore. I think teams do that with Scrum as well. I think that when you start putting stuff in and you don't go back and say, when you look at it as a permanent solution without ever going back to ask, do we still need to be doing this? I think that's the overreaction. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing on retrospective, people aren't going to do it. They're not comfortable. I think that, to me, what I have found is it's the opposite. What I have found is that, we see this all the time, right? You divide the world into two types of people, and we know there's lots of types. But in this instance, right, you have people who are going to talk in a retro, and then you have the wallflowers who just kind of sit there. Now, that doesn't mean the wallflowers don't have an opinion. That doesn't mean that they are not frustrated with things that are happening. It just means that they're not sharing it. They're not comfortable in that public forum sharing it. I'd be willing to bet my paycheck that those wallflowers still come to people within their sprints or their cycles or their PIs, and they're complaining about things. They're talking about, hey, man, I had a really good day today. I loved when we did this or we worked together. It was really a lot of fun working with you. Or this absolutely sucks. We can't get anything done. I'm pulled in 100 directions, right? These are the authentic reactions that we really would be looking to get out of a retrospective. And this is one of the things that I've been coaching one of the people at Insight on that I'm responsible for is kind of mentoring. And that is, focus on the outcome. If the goal is to identify areas to improve, if the goal is to identify on things to keep doing, listen for those things throughout the week. How many times, even with your people who are active talkers, you get into retro and everybody's sitting around there going, they're scratching their heads, they're trying to figure out what to put on the whiteboard. And you're looking across at the room, and if you've been paying attention, you're like, dude, you're the same guy that came to me this week, and you had 40 things you wanted to complain about. Now you can't think of one. So why, we get into this situation? If you can capture those types of things throughout just the daily life, why not just come to a retro and say, hey guys, I was listening. I heard you this week. These are the things we talked about that are causing you pain points, that are stresses and problems. These are the things that are going really well. Do these all still jive and make sense? Cool. Are these things we want to tackle this week? Sure. Hey, guess what? Your retro just ended after 10 minutes, and it was a heck of a lot more valuable than the last 7-8 months of 90-minute retros you spent where people sat around scratching their heads. People will naturally bring up the things that frustrate them, the things that make them happy. It's just human nature. The challenge, I think, with retrospective is we put it into such a formal situation where people they don't typically perform under that kind of pressure in those moments, because what you're doing is you're pressuring vulnerability. People don't do well being vulnerable under pressure. The two things seem to be counterintuitive. I can't remember what the third thing was you had mentioned. There was a third part too. But
that's interesting. You have my wheels spinning. And that's what I love about working with Todd is he gets me to question my life every day that we interact. I think of retrospective as well as the ability to create space for teams to inspect and adapt. So it's not always about necessarily the individuals aren't going to do it. It's that leadership doesn't create that space for them. But I guess I never thought about the pressure component of it, of being put on the spot. And that definitely happens to me all the time. That happened to me in our last episode on Thursday when Drew was like, hey, so what was great about this presentation? And I was like, every thought just left my brain.
I'm glad you said the word leadership. That reminded me of the third thing. So you talked about courage at a leadership level too, Drew. And I think that if you have courage at your grassroots level, courage at the leadership level becomes less critical. Because again, the great thing about scaling, right? And I see this happen too often or I see this not happening often enough. We typically think of scaling as how to make frameworks bigger, right? When we think about SAFe, it's dealing with large groups. How do we deal with increasing complexity, increasing groups of people, increasing, integrations? Scrum built Nexus because Scrum couldn't handle it, so it needed to be bigger. Scaling isn't intended to be unidirectional. You can scale down as well. If you've got courage at a grassroots level, you're better at having it just at a grassroots level, in my opinion, than at just the executive level. If you have it at the grassroots level and you have a small group of people who are willing to step out on faith, find the smallest little area where they can tuck in without making disruption that's going to cause problems and prove the value of the principles that some of this stuff is built on, then what you can do is, even without the courage of leadership, they start seeing the balance of risk and reward change. And now they don't have to be as courageous. Well, you did this over here and you got value out of this? Okay, you got my interest now. Because now you've proven me with the proof of concept you can do it. If you've got some small faction of people willing to start to do that and show the value, you're more inclined to get leadership to buy in where they may not have had courage without that value prop before. But if you're leading from the top down and people aren't going to necessarily, that change doesn't tend to be as lasting. Hey, you're going to do this and we think it's valuable. All right, well, we'll do it. And then when the cat is away, the mice will play, right? If they don't see the value in it. But that grassroots understanding of the value, we're doing it because it makes sense. We'll do it in an area that we can get away with and show that value. You start to get buy-in and create influence from the inside out. Just kind of like throwing a stone into a pond and watching those ripples continue out.
So, I love that analogy as well. The idea of like innovation riptides and things like that. The first part of my career I spent as a project manager, and I say this all the time on all the episodes. I would come home at night, cry into my pillow. Why are none of my projects on time? Why are they always at risk? Why is nobody seeing things the way that I'm seeing? And then when I got my first team that was trying to experiment with Scrum and I started leaning into it and understanding it a bit more, I suddenly felt this immense pressure up on above because my role as the project manager was to provide insights into the activities that was going on in the Scrum team. And at the same time, we were just getting like these huge, ridiculous requirements that had way too much information in it, and probably 20% of it was the right information. And so it was my job to then convert that into a way that would allow the teams to have their autonomy. And it was like this thankless role that I was doing for a while where I had the immense weight of the waterfall up against my back, and I had my arms, protecting my Scrum team so they can do their experiment and self-organization. And so like when I'm hearing you talk about this, like what I'm wondering is, when you don't have that person up on high that is protecting that space for you, how do you carve out the focus from all the project managers who are trying to say, all right, we got a status meeting now. We have another status meeting. We have to have another status meeting, and we got to have another project kickoff and another project kickoff. And how does that work when all of that's going on?
I think you've just got to look for the smallest area you can carve out to prove out that value, right? And it might be seemingly infinitesimal, like just absolutely tiny. But if you can start there and grow it, I find the analogy I regularly use when you're trying to bring about change is that of boiling a frog, right? And if you're not familiar with the analogy of boiling a frog, right, the idea is, how do you boil a frog? Well, if you throw a frog in a pot of boiling water, it's going to jump right out. But if you put it in cold water and you slowly turn that water up, that frog will sit there never moving. Change is best received in these really small little increments that are almost unidentifiable. So I feel like what we encounter is people are like, oh, but that's not big enough to make a difference. Well, it depends on how you define difference, right? Teams do this too. Well, we can't slice our story that small, it's not valuable. Well, how are you defining value? Like if you can slice it even smaller and smaller, like we've done this. I've encountered this in vertical slicing conversations where you're trying to get them to slice vertically and not just build components, right? Well, but if we do that, it's tiny. Like it's just this little thing. Okay. But you've proven a couple of things, right? So we just have to start changing mindsets and perspectives, I think. And I'll go back to the example I used with retro, right? I've got somebody who's working at a client. They're very locked down. There's not a lot of freedom to try and innovate. But it was like, what's the smallest little experiment you can try that you can do that might show that you can create some value? He said, well, we could probably try and do this. They're more concerned with seeing what comes out of a retro than they are us having it. Cool. You can still get to that, but you can try it a different way. So I think it's just a matter, and it might be on one story. It might be in one activity. It might be in one task. It might be in one conversation. But start changing the perspective at the smallest place you can where you don't need that air cover, where you are enough of your own air cover.
Interesting. So, Ron, what is, I would say, something that you've learned through this journey of sharing FAST out into the world and hearing people like Todd running with this concept and making it a reality?
I think I've learned a lot about the nature of work, the nature of organizations itself. And it's really moved my passion or interest from Agile to Teal, where, Drew's talking about these organizational styles and the culture question always comes up. And I feel like so many, Agile transformations that I've been a part of didn't work, or they were doomed from day one, just because the culture of the organization and the way that they think about work and the way they think about people. So FAST really opened me up to new ways of working and what's possible, and new ways of thinking about work and structuring our organizations. That's been the big eye-opener for me. And I now say, I'm more passionate about Teal than I am about FAST, because as soon as you talk about something, they're like, oh, you're trying to sell me on FAST. I'm like, I don't care if you do FAST or not. What I do care about is that we start fixing up the places that we work, that we start creating human-centered organizations, that's kind of what I hope FAST can bring about as well. So it's kind of a two-way street.
So you mentioned teal organizations. That's like was it amber, orange, green, teal,
Yeah,
like maturity of an organization? Is that what you're referring to?
His language. And I'm so torn with that word teal because everyone's like, what does that teal mean? And it triggers some people. And, the benefit of the word agile is it's one term that people understand, and it's a tip of something very, a lot larger. And so there's a whole movement going on around human-centered organizations and new ways of working and changing the way we work, moving out of the age of mass production, into the age of disruption, becoming adaptive organizations. So all of that, we don't have a flag yet. We haven't had 20 white men sit in a room and come up with a name for it yet. But so I'm using teal for now. Maybe a better term might come up. But
Reinventing Organizations as a book was absolutely life-changing for me. I read it for the first time. I was in London. I was coaching an agile transformation at the post office and living in hotel rooms. It just completely, it validated so much of what I already knew, and it gave me the words to better communicate that as well. But then it also took it a step further, like with the idea of holacracies. Like, I'm going to get back to it again. That's where I want to work, right? Like, that's the place where I want to work. And for me, the call to action in what I'm doing now is I believe that we can actually all work at places like that at some point. And that's why I do what I do each day, right? And that's why I have the conversations I have with people and connecting people. So I really love the fact that that's what I was kind of getting at, the idea of, I feel like it was misunderstood when I said safe is an overreaction, right? When I say that, what I mean is that safe is a great framework. It's a great tool. It's got lots of great concepts, many of which are safe concepts, most of which are concepts that exist elsewhere in the wild and were just put into a framework. And it's the thing that'll get you the next 100 miles, 300 miles, or whatever. But it's not the thing that's going to get us there. It's not the thing that's going to get us to teal organizations and human-centered organizations. And it's an unlocker that will hopefully unhinge companies to get them to a place where they can get ready to shift into that teal mindset organization from my perspective. And so when I said it was like an overreaction, really what I meant was it's a reaction to the way that the paradigms that these big stodgy enterprises are stuck in right now to try to get them further along the line. But it's not the thing, like what FAST sounds like, it's not the thing that will help them to really become that teal organization.
Yeah, Drew, something I found myself saying in conversations recently, and this kind of applies to any of them. Frameworks are a great place to start. They're a terrible place to stop. I think getting those things in place help people who are trying to learn and find a way. It gives you guide rails. As a child, as kids, as infants, you put them in a crib so they have guardrails that keep them from rolling out. But as they grow, as they age and mature, you don't see those typically on an adult's king-size bed, right? I don't need rails to keep me in my bed anymore. I've figured out how to do that through maturity and through growth. So I think frameworks are a great place to start, but they're a terrible place to stop and stay. They're a great jumping off point. They give you a good foundation. For the reason you pointed out about SAFe, all these things, and it's true with Scrum, it's true with FAST, it's true with any framework you look like. None of these frameworks own these principles. Do the right thing for the right reasons. Communicate and talk and make sure that you're not just talking to each other, but that you're understanding each other, right? Communication and comprehension, getting past communication and to comprehension. All of these frameworks are essentially textbooks written in a way to help you start doing these things, but then you need to evolve to move past this, right? This is that concept of shuhari and kind of continuing to grow. So I think you're right. I think this idea of don't start there. This isn't the destination. This is just the beginning part of your journey. This is how we set you off with a set of basic bare minimum tools to keep moving. But I think that what has happened and the overcorrection is an oversimplification, giving these frameworks too much credit that they're going to get us to the end, right? Versus, no, they're just going to get you out the door. This is that first step to get you moving and set you off with a base set of tools. But I wouldn't want anybody to just know FAST or just know SAFe or just know Scrum or any of these. Learn all these different things. Take these tools and figure out what works for you, and then move forward with those and find ways to evolve those, find ways to break those, to refine them, to get better. Not because the tools are important, but because the principles they're teaching you to get to, the outcomes they're helping you to get to, if you can learn to do those things with these tools, you can learn to do them with other tools as well. They just give you a basic set.
I once heard, and I don't know if there's any truth to this at all, but I'm going to repeat it and continue the myth if it's not true, but that when Edgar Winter wrote Frankenstein, right? You know the song Frankenstein? Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, I did that. In the studio, they cut up the tape for the different segments and like threw them up in the air and then spliced them back together again based on where they landed and opportunity and whatnot. I'm just kind of feeling like there's a parable there, right? In the sense that like we could take some of this and we could take some of that, and why don't we try some of this for a little bit? And, knowing that we're just trying it out, and if this configuration works for us for a period of time, let's keep doing it, but let's not stop there, and let's cut up Frankenstein again and throw it up in the air. And as somebody who has major ADHD, right? Like I come up with frameworks for myself to be able to keep my personal life backlog. On a regular basis, what winds up happening is it stops working for me. And I never know when it's going to be. And so what I do on a regular basis is I just tear it all apart and build it back up again with new tools and new ideas and concepts. And part of the action of doing that is very cathartic because it helps me to reset. It helps me to see what works well, what didn't work well, and what are the attributes that I want to do differently. So, but I want to buy a t-shirt with the quote that you just said on it. I want every piece of my clothing to have on it. Frameworks are a great place to start, but they're a terrible place to stop. I think that's so. I thought that was so powerful.
Other way I like seeing that in a different framing is Scrum's really good at what Scrum's good at, and FAST is really good at what FAST is good at. SAFe is really good at what SAFe's good at, and don't kid yourself that any of these are a nirvana. They're not an end point. Find out what is good about them, what its strengths are, and what its weaknesses are, and then you're in a really strong point of knowing what you're doing and why, and when to switch between them. Well, Waterfall is actually really good at what it's good at, and we've thrown that baby out with the bathwater. And I'm like, no. If you are in a highly deterministic, reductionistic problem, which is in the complicated zone, Waterfall actually works really well. But we've gotten this mindset of like Waterfall bad, Agile good, and that's where we've caught ourselves. Scrum is this thing on this pedestal. Like I don't want to poo-poo Scrum, but it's really good at what it's good at. And there's things that it's not good at, and let's get real and discover that for yourself and become honest. Start becoming honest with yourself about, hey, this thing isn't perfect for this situation. This other thing is better, and start to understand complicated, complex, the difference between those, and when you're in those spaces, what should I be doing?
One of my biggest epiphanies in the last few years came, and I think most people have heard this idea that, well, they do their flavor of Agile. And I think historically it was like, oh, if they're doing their flavor of Agile, there's a negative connotation that comes with it. And I started asking why. Like, shouldn't that be the goal? Like their flavor, but not even just their flavor for their organization, but their flavor for that moment, right? This idea of what makes sense right now where you are, do that. So if that means parts of this and parts of that, great. But I think historically we have a lot of people in our community that do what we do. And they're like, oh, well, if you're doing your flavor of Agile, you're not Agile. I think if you're not doing your flavor of Agile, you're not living with agility. Like that's the key, right? You're not asking the right questions. You're not pivoting as you should.
Well, but here's the challenge I have with you there, right? So like Capital One, who laid off like 1,500 people back in February, and they laid off every single Scrum Master and Agile coach. They were doing their flavor of Agile, and along came a new executive committee or a new CTO, whatever that was. And, Agile bad and out with the Agile. And so to me, Brad and I had a conversation around Shuha Ree with regards to this, and I think where we landed, like, because I was under the mindset of that. I think it was what Ken Schwaber said, that if you're not following the Scrum guide, you're not doing Scrum. And I challenged to say, like, well, okay, what about like trying? Like, where does trying fit into Shuhari, right? And I think that the thing is that the reason why we say if you're not following the Scrum guide, you're not doing Scrum, is that we don't want you to blame Scrum if it doesn't work out well. We don't want you to blame Agile if it doesn't work out well. And that's kind of exactly what happened at Capital One. Is they blamed Agile, and now they're doing some weird DevOpsy type experiment that is, is it the flavor of DevOps? It's in the ice cream container, but I don't think that what's inside the pint is really DevOps.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up both those things. I guess what I would say is that just like religion, it's been hijacked over the years and the centuries, right, for people for their agendas, so they can say they're doing their flavor of Agile, and it's just a way to kind of blanket or cover themselves in other decisions they're making. I love the fact that you brought up the Scrum Guide piece too, because I think Brad and I have talked about this at work. Like, to me, I know they had the revision. What was that, 2020? I think they came out with the most recent revision. Like, the most recent revision literally needed to be, in my opinion, one sentence at the very back of the guide. And that was that if you're not doing all the components of Scrum, this isn't Scrum. But hey, that's okay. Mm-hmm. Like, there may still be value in that, right? Like, do what makes sense for you at the time. But I think it's important to call out a delineation between the two. And I've had this discussion with many people. It's okay to not do Scrum and to just do parts of Scrum that make sense for you. The reason that I think it's important to identify when you're not doing Scrum is it so you can't blame Scrum. Instead, you have to carefully inspect your implementation of whatever it was you did. Like, that's the key.
Like what you just said, the response, because people can't see, right? But as soon as you just said that one little statement of, you're not doing Scrum, but thank you for trying. The three of us here nodding our heads, my fist went up in the air, like that. You're full of really great statements and isms, and that it's just awesome, right? That really resonates well with me.
And I appreciate that. And I don't have any ill will against Scrum. I think Scrum, like we've said, it has a place and a purpose, right? Just like a flathead screwdriver does, right? Or a hammer does. And I think that the pieces and parts of Scrum are valuable. I think the point that Scrum would like people to understand is that we believe that our framework is most valuable when used together to deliver this set of outcomes. But that doesn't mean that you should throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you can't do everything, let's say that your organization isn't structured to give you fully autonomous product owners with 100% agency. Does that mean you shouldn't do any of it? No. If you can still get value from review and getting feedback from stakeholders and get them involved, or you still find there's value in retro or in minimizing complexity and increasing collaboration through a daily connection, right? Call it a daily Scrum or whatever you want to call it. I don't care. Then do those things. Just don't call it Scrum, because it's not. Because Scrum, like baseball, has a very specific set of rules. Now, I can go out and play with a bunch of friends and do very similar things and play very similar. Like, we get a lot of fun out of fielding the ball and swinging and hitting, but we're only playing with one guy in the outfield and, you get one pitch. It's not baseball anymore. But we still have a lot of fun doing it, and there's still something to it. But I can't, so when somebody comes along and says, well, you're not doing baseball, I shouldn't be trying to defend what I'm doing as baseball, because there are a set of rules. And Scrum even calls them rules for that reason. But I think it's important to recognize that call a spade a spade. If it isn't Scrum, be okay with saying it's not Scrum. Scrum does not own, and neither does SAFe, neither does FAST, any of these things that existed outside of it. Scrum doesn't own empiricism or inspection and adaptation, right? SAFe doesn't own planning out big releases. I think the thing is people get so afraid to say they're not doing it that they call it what they feel like it should be. And then when the implementations fail, they blame the tool rather than the implementation.
So if we were going to, let's say I was a client, developer, architect, product manager, and like we were talking, and I came to you guys and said, I saw you guys present at the last conference. I want to get started. I want to try this on as an experiment. What are your recommendations? Where do you start trying FAST?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot, and it's a really good question. I have to think about that, because when when FAST emerged and evolved, it did so incrementally, and I don't know if I can't prescribe those same incremental steps, because that was just how it happened where we were at that point in time. But my answer now is typically, well, why don't you host or facilitate a hackathon? because companies are kind of used to that. They understand that. Say, facilitate a hackathon and use FAST, but don't say that you're using FAST. So it's because a hackathon is so similar to FAST, right? You get the entire company come together, they sit in a room, and then they go, all right, we got a hackathon for 2 days. Who's got an idea? And someone will get up on the stage and go, yeah, I got this idea. Someone else go, oh, I got this one. Okay, now we got 6 ideas. The rest of the room go, all right, and they pick which idea they're going to go with. They sit with that person for 2 days, and they produce working software at the end of 2 days. That's FAST right there, right? That is FAST. So you do this hackathon, and you get to the end of it, and you go, hey, how did we find that hackathon? How did it make you feel? How did it compare to the way we normally work? Do you want to run an experiment with using this process for our work and just see who puts their hands up, and then go, all right, you lot, come over here. We're gonna try this like hackathon experiment with work. Don't mention FAST. Don't mention the guide. Don't do any of that. But just like start from that point, and then later you can drop out. Here's what we're doing. It's actually based on this thing called FAST. What can we borrow from it? Do we want to take from it? Do we want to do FAST by the guide? Or have we discovered something else that works just fine for us?
I miss hackathons. I actually, Brad, while you were gone, the episode that we recorded, there's a guy named Jamil Mateen who works for Zencastr full time, but he has a nonprofit organization. He was a Marine, I was in the Navy, a nonprofit organization called fallin.org. And he runs a open hackathon every 3 months that's virtual for veterans who are getting out of the military or recently separated, for them to socialize and collaborate and build challenging things. But I miss the days of like going to hackathons in New York City at like Huge Inc. or wherever it was, and AWS was there and Google was there, and all the swag in the middle of the room. And such great things came out of those events. There's a lot of innovation, opportunities to learn. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
If I can weigh in on that last question too, for a second, I think, and Ron kind of got there a little bit, but I think it's just at a more, let's just say, existential level. It's more of a start where you are, like understanding what it is you're doing. Because here's the thing, right? I think we've said it a few times now. None of these concepts, the outcomes or the practices, are unique. This isn't nirvana. I think, Ron, was the word you used, right? These things exist outside these frameworks. So helping the client to understand what are some of the things that you're doing already today that we could incorporate that are minor tweaks. I've had a real life example recently where I was able to do this. The client that I'm at had a big bang release with multiple different integrations that had to come together. Big surprise here. Guess what? Big bang stands for big blow up, right? That explosion you heard, that bang, was not at all going into production. It was all falling apart when they tried to integrate 4 different applications together and they hadn't talked to each other. So what did they do? What was the response? They pulled these groups of people with all the skills necessary to build what they should have done in the first place together into a war room for 2 weeks, for 12 hours a day on end, for 2 weeks. And they got all the stuff done, they got it fixed, and they got it deployed, and it was only a week behind schedule to get it through everything. So when I asked him afterwards, because I was in a meeting with the CIO and the CTO, and he said, so what would you have done differently? And I said, I'd have done what we did in the war rooms all along. I said, what you had was focus. You had a clear direction and a singular priority. This idea of priorities blows me away, right? Priority comes from the Latin word prioritas, meaning a single thing, right? It's a single elite thing above all else. They had a given priority, and they were given the focus and all the skills to work through what they needed to do. And then when they got that done, they moved to the next. So what was happening in these war rooms? Well, the product manager would say, we need to get this done. This is the goal, right? This is the big thing we're working on right now. And the teams would step up and people would say, well, we need to do this for that. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to be in breakout room 2 and I'm going to work on this. Well, I'm going to need somebody from this group. I got you. I'll come with you. Well, we need to do this. Okay, I'm going to breakout room 3. You know what? You're going to need my help. I got you. I'm coming with you. And it literally was seeing this thing evolve. So I think understanding and helping clients see that this isn't nirvana. Where are you? How can we help you understand that this isn't something new? It's just adding a little bit of structure. And this is my word for 2023. Intentionality, or intentional, being more intentional in what we're doing instead of reactive. If you can help clients see that, hey, this isn't nirvana, this isn't new, we just want to add some intentional to it and help you with that, I think that the adoption becomes easier.
Is this something that, let's say I have a Scrum team and I'm doing most of Scrum. Is this something that I could just introduce into maybe like my daily Scrum? Like we don't have a plan, but we know there's work that needs to get done. Daily Scrum. Hey, what are we going to do in the next 24 hours?
My introduction to Agile was through extreme programming. And there's a lot in common. There's a lot of XP actually in FAST. So when my first XP team, I'd show up at work at 9 o'clock. By 9:30, we would have a huddle. It wasn't called the Scrum, but we'd stand in a semicircle around a board. On that board was everything that needed to happen in that iteration. And then we would just talk around that semicircle, usually in order. Sometimes it didn't matter. And when I showed up to work, I had a hunch of, there was a couple of things. I might know what I wanted to work on. I'd be really passionate about it. Or I might be like, I don't know what I'm going to do yet. Or I'd show up and someone would say, hey, I'm going to be on this. Who wants to pair with me? I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. That sounds interesting. So every day we organized our day, and it was emergent based on what happened yesterday and how we're feeling the next day. And that was what Agile was to me. And that was the best team I've ever been. I've always been looking for that nirvana. And a lot of FAST is me trying to get back to that. It's me being selfish of like saying, that's the environment I want to work in again, by the way. And so it's that all over again, but that you can't escape it. So I've made self-organization inescapable now, which is kind of what, Brad, to your point, maybe that's what you got to do for your Scrum team. Say, hey, why don't we loosen up a little more? And because that's really what that Scrum meeting is supposed to be, isn't it? Like, hey, what are we going to do today? But come up with more emergence to that meeting. And to Todd's point of, maybe that's your baby steps towards moving to this space of a complex adaptive system.
I would say it depends, right? I mean, that's kind of how we started with where I'm at this client right now. What's the purpose, right? Then when I say it depends, what's the intent or the purpose? What are you trying to get from your daily Scrum? If your daily Scrum is there because the organization told you to do Scrum, and you come in and it's like, hey, we're status updating. We've all been there, right? We've all felt that pain. Probably not going to be a good start. But if you're using the daily Scrum as intended, and it's an inspect and adapt opportunity. Learn from the last 24 hours so you can adapt your plan and how you're going to approach the work for the next 24 hours. It's very similar to what the FAST meeting is, right? We sync up on what we've done since we got together the last time so we can adjust and reorganize and go back after this problem again. Now, if you've got a lot of different integrations and different complexities and different applications talking together, you might need to make your meeting a little bit bigger. It might need to pull more people in. But I think that the intent of both is very similar. What's our goal? Where are we trying to get to in this next iterative cycle, this next cycle, right? Let's throw iterative out. Like, where are we trying to get to as a group in this next cycle? And then what do we know about the last cycle that helps us to be more efficient in our pursuit of our goal in the next cycle? If you think about the daily Scrum that way, there's not much difference between that and a FAST collective. It's bringing the right people together to identify what's important and then how you're going to pursue it together.
I would agree to that. And it's funny that you brought up XP, Ron, because I almost said that at the beginning, that there's part like FAST reminds me a little bit of XP, where it may be a little extreme for people, which means it might be kind of hard to fit in anywhere. But I've known organizations, Todd and I are both from the same area, and there was a competitor at one time that did XP, and they were brilliant at what they did, and they were very focused, and they didn't pretend to be what they weren't, which is great. But I do want to say this has not been a FAST episode. We've definitely used up a lot of time, and I could talk all night to you guys, but I do want to make sure that I ask you about the training you guys are creating.
Yeah, take it away, Todd.
Yeah, so Ron and I have been collaborating for about the last 4 weeks over the course of his move and all that added complexity. We just love complexity. To build a training outline, right, and actually craft some of the first training. So the first publicly offered training will be coming up May 10th and 11th in Columbus, Ohio. I know there's some others on the books as well. Ron is going to be leading one, as I understand it, a few days prior to Agile 2023 in Orlando. There's one scheduled for Copenhagen. that Ron had talked about me going out to at one point. Not going to lie, I'm a little disappointed. I don't think I'm going. Copenhagen sounded very beautiful and nice to go to, but we're going to have the one coming up in Columbus, so you can get out there and sign up for that. But we are getting together for that. I'm actually going up to Detroit here in here in a couple of weeks to dry run and build this training with Ron. Now, currently, the training is going to be built in person. We both agreed that we kind of wanted that foundational in-person training built first, and then we'll virtualize it. I have found trainings built virtually and then reversed into in-person don't work nearly as well as opposed to in-person first and virtualized. So we'll be doing that, but the first training will be available there. You can find it at fastagile.io under the training site, and sign up for those there, get the links for that there. We are excited about that. I think it'll be neat to get people just kind of interested and learning and understanding really what this comes down to. And honestly, it's a fast training, but it's really just about getting people to focus on principle-driven collaboration and how they can do the right things for the right reasons. And that's the litmus by which we should be inspecting everything.
And do I get a piece of paper when I'm done?
We'll give you a digital badge you can stick on your LinkedIn profile, Brad. How about that?
Perfect.
It'll even have a teal color to it.
Nice.
Yeah. And I'm speaking at Agile Beyond in a few months, and I'm still hoping to sweet talk Todd and Ron into showing up there to maybe make a guest appearance, TBD. But yeah, so we've been talking for a good amount of time. Love everything in this episode. If you are capable of traveling for one of the first trainings, I think it will be awesome opportunity for anyone to be the first in. And on that note, what else do you want to share as kind of ending thoughts, Ron or Todd?
I was thinking of a comedy ending, like, hey, come to this first training and we'll give you the special certification that you're at the first class training.
They're numbered.
Yes.
Numbered certifications. Yeah.
Yuck, 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 yuck.
I guess I would.
Too.
The last thing I would say is that this isn't meant to displace any of the existing frameworks, right? This is meant to be another complementary tool. If we as human beings, as servants of our clients in consulting or our employers, if we're FTEs, have a real desire to help provide the most amount of value to the people we work for, to the clients we serve, if we have that true servant leadership, servant heart that we want, we can only be best equipped to do that with a broad set of tools. This is another tool to add to that tool belt. I think it's something that can get people thinking radically, thinking differently. Like I said earlier, one of my favorite books is In Defense of Troublemakers. So I would say come to the class, learn a new tool, find a new way to make some trouble, to make sure that you have everything necessary in your tool belt to deliver value where you are, and that you can pick and choose from this buffet of abilities and perspectives.
Awesome.
Oh, I'm excited for this. I think that's awesome. And I am already looking at the registration page right now, actually, as we speak. So I might be one of the first.
I'll treat you to dinner, Drew. Come on down, man. I'll take you out for a good dinner.
Awesome.
Wow.
Yeah, come visit us. So what's something, I guess, that you're going to take away from today, Drew?
Well, a couple of things. One, aside from those two amazing quotes, Todd, that you had, Ron, like you talking about the idea of development cycles paralleling the concept of a hackathon, or the idea that like Scrum meetings or Scrum events or PI planning or whatever your time box like boundary is, paralleling a open space really like got me charged. Like that I'm going to think about those ideas for at least the next like week or two. And figuring out like how to work that into my own coaching, right? Because both of those types of events, hackathons and open spaces, always result in some really like well-charged people who are newly inspired, have a set of direction and ideas. And, if you put that at the heart of your team's way of working, then the things they'll be able to do will just be tremendous. The outcomes they'll be able to achieve if you give them the autonomy and the trust and the space to work in that way. So I'm really like looking forward to seeing how this unfolds for sure.
Yeah, I'm also excited to see where this goes and if it picks up steam. I think it's fantastic. The thing that kind of stuck with me that I'm going to be noodling on is some of your comments, Ron, about autonomy. When it comes to, like, we all have autonomy in our daily lives. Why is it so hard in the workforce? And it made me think of one of our last episodes with Patty, who used to be a school teacher and talked about how our school system is set up to kind of teach that Tayloristic approach to leadership. But I'm going to definitely keep noodling on that. And I think as Agilists, I often view us as being like altruistic. A lot of times in interviews, I'll say people work 90,000 hours over their lifetime, and it's my goal to make that as enjoyable as possible. And so I just love this conversation of like, how can we make people awesome, right? Like modern Agile would say, whether it's our businesses, our stakeholders, our team, or our clients.
Love it.
Well, thanks guys for inviting us on. It was a pleasure to get to talk about this and to meet you, Drew, and to share and kind of dive into this a little bit. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys. This has been wonderful to be a part of this journey and get a sense. And also, to say that this is our first recording with 4 people. So thank you for being part of that experiment a little bit. It went well, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys joining us. As Drew said, I think I forgot to warn you, this was our experiment for 4 people. And Ron, I look forward to meeting you in person. Drew, maybe you'll be in person too soon.
I think so. That would be really cool. I would definitely love that.
Awesome.
So www.agileforagilists.com is our website. Please feel free to leave us a message on Memo FM, which is embedded into the website. And you can record a voice message, or you can just go old school and leave us a text comment. We want to hear back from you guys. And thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.